Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben. Today I'm absolutely thrilled with my new guest, my personal hero, Mr. TroyDenning. He's known for his career, which includes such credits as a game designer at TSR. He's a co-creator of the popular D&D Dark Sun setting. He's also a New York Times bestseller who worked with popular franchises such as Forgotten Realms, Planescape, and of course, Star Wars fans know him for his new Jedi Order novels, Legacy, and The Fate of the Jedi. Troy, I'm so delighted to have you. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, thanks, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. We had a little miscalculation with our Zoom settings. We're finally back on track. I'm so excited to talk to you. How's your summer going so far? You're busy these days?
I've been fairly busy with conventions and trying to catch up on some home repair stuff that I had to let lapse when I had my heart surgery a couple years ago. Um, I haven't been doing a lot of writing for about 7 or 8 months, but I'm starting a couple of new projects, which I'm really thrilled about, and which unfortunately I can't talk about. But
Interesting. Well, obviously, we're going to include all the relevant links which are important to you. So all the audience, all the fans who are watching us will have the chance to go and check it out and keep in the loop what's going on with your writing at the moment. But Troy, I wanted us to start with some general overall questions and sort of build our way into Star Wars. I think as exciting, as awesome as Star Wars is, there are other interesting things to touch upon. And I wanted to start with a very general question, for an author, which is such a prolific career as yours, what would you say are some of the most challenging but also rewarding projects that you worked on?
oh boy, well, I think for every author, every tie-in author, I should say, his first project is going to be the most challenging, because you don't understand what tie-in work is, and you don't understand that you're trying to meet more goals than just your own. You're trying to meet some publisher goals. I mean, they obviously have a reason that they want this book published, and you have to fulfill those goals and those objectives. And getting used to the idea that you're not writing just for yourself, but you're writing for all of the fans who enjoy that franchise, and for the publisher who's trying to achieve something and advance their franchise in a certain way. It takes some getting used to, and not every author can make that transition.
Absolutely. Would you say that being a tie-in media writer is almost like a subgenre in itself?
I think that it's a it's a special set of skills. I'm not sure that I would call it a subgenre, because as a prolific reader myself, I love to read tie-in products, but I also love to read original product in the same um, genre. I mean, I'm a science fiction author or reader from way back,
Mm-hmm.
and I came into that reading category as somebody who was reading Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, and people who were writing long before there was such a thing as tie-in writing.
Right.
And I try to hold myself up to the same standards as they wrote to. And I also find that if somebody that I read isn't writing to those same standards, I don't enjoy it. And
Yeah.
and that applies whether they're a tie-in writer or an original IP writer.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think in terms of the skill set that you need to separate the two. You just need to separate the two in terms of the writer's attitude. In that, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm writing to fulfill not only what I want to do, which I always fulfill that first, but I also have to fulfill what the publisher wants to do
Yeah.
and what the IP holder wants to do,
And
and
as
and most importantly,
mhm.
I'm always trying to keep in mind what the fans, the people who read that, um, want to see. Because I'll tell you a little secret: if you don't please them, you don't write a second book. you know?
I was just about to. I think it's an idea that we'll circle back to that. It's particularly, I've been around. I'm 43 years old. I've been around when America Online just started, and the internet was a novel, is a huge thing. Where just
Yeah.
via message board you would chat with people and talk about the Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars prequels. But with the advent and evolution of social media, the fandom is so passionate. Not just Star Wars in general. Science fiction fans, and they're so vocal and passionate, and they guard and protect their favorite franchises with their chest. And they will absolutely know the company, the showrunners, and the authors if you're doing a job that kind of meets their expectation or not, regardless of quality. And another
Right.
thing I also wanted to touch with you is, I barely scratched the surface of the Dungeons and Dragons myself. Started reading some of the Forgotten Realms novels, some of the Dragonlance books, which are some of my favorites. They're absolutely brilliant. But you're also a co-creator of the Dark Sun setting, which I know, I'm vaguely familiar with the brand, but I know that it's adored by Dungeons and Dragon fans around the world. And what was it like working with Tim Brown, Mary Kirchhoff, and obviously a famous legendary fantasy artist, Brom?
Oh, it was a privilege and a true joy. And it's one of those things that at the time you didn't realize what a privilege it was, because we were just doing a job.
Mhm.
We had been assigned to create a new uh, uh, Dungeons and Dragons setting, and our goal when our guidelines when we were given this assignment were to create a dungeon setting where it would make sense for people to wear the skimpy costumes that authors or that artists love to paint, the characters in. And so that's why we came up with the desert setting where it was too hot to wear armor. And then from that, everything else developed. And it was like the idea became, well, if you're not wearing armor, maybe metal's also scarce. And it's a desert setting. So it's a very harsh place. It's hard to survive. And then we extrapolated from that into the eco theme, the ecological theme, where okay, magic has been destroying the world, and it was, I don't know, it was at the time it just seemed like we were doing our jobs and enjoying it. I mean, it was a fun job, don't get me wrong, but you look back on it and realize that, as I do with so much of the time that I worked at TSR and with Star Wars as well, how privileged and lucky you were to be involved with that. I mean, the people that I worked with have gone on to become legends, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just, I was like privileged to be among them.
It's
You know?
like almost a Metallica describing their success story, right? Right? Perhaps probably one of the most renowned rock bands around the world. And they said we were just four kids playing in a garage who wanted to play music, and we got lucky.
Yeah.
And I think that also translates in your personal body of work, which we'll talk about today, is that genuine love and passion and understanding of the source material, and also understanding you're translating somebody's world, but you also get to play around in that sandbox as an author. You get to introduce new characters. You get to inherit characters from previous books and detail them out in the new exciting, fresh ways that fans would not perceive before. And you would say, interesting. Now, this is TroyDenning's voice. This is his interpretation of the character. This is where he takes Forgotten Realms of Star Wars. And I think it's just fascinating to observe as a reader myself. And, Troy, as some of the Star Wars authors that I got the chance to already interview, and I feel like it's a great privilege on my behalf. I talked to Kenneth Flint, who wrote a couple of short stories, and he has this famous story of the unpublished Star Wars book, The Heart of the Jedi, which the fans got to know. And I got to talk to Sean Stewart. I got to talk to John Jackson Miller, Claudia Gray, one of the recent Star Wars authors, which I think she's absolutely brilliant. But they all describe a very specific and a different experience working with Del Rey and Bantam Spectra. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions in regard to that. What was it like working within the expanded universe in Star Wars?
Um, it was pretty much a dream come true. My first experience with writing for Star Wars was actually not in novels. It was a game with some game products. They, what did we call them? They were They were basically endless quest books where you choose your own adventure, but I can't remember the
The West
specific
End
term.
games, did you work on those?
Which one?
The West End
Yeah,
tabletop
yes,
games.
West End Games. My
Hmm.
first project for them was Galaxy Guide 4, which was uh, just about as much fun as a game designer can have because um, what had happened was somebody who had worked for me, who had gone to college with, and who had worked for me at TSR, had gone to West End Games and become their manager of design. And he knew that I was very interested in Star Wars, that I loved it. And so when they got the Star Wars license, he contacted me and said, "Hey, how would you like to do some Star Wars projects for us?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I could do that."
Yes, please.
Yeah. And so
uh,
the first job he gave me was to go
yeah.
through the list of unknown characters and species in the cantina scene, and he said, "All right, write up backgrounds for all of these guys so that we know what they are and what kind of species they are and so forth." And so
That's
he said,
interesting and different too, right?
yeah,
Not what
oh,
you
and
would
so,
expect.
oh yeah, it was fun. It was fun, and sat down, and because I didn't want all of those characters, those species, to be in one voice
Hmm.
and to have one idea behind them or one mind behind them, I recruited um, a friend of mine, Steve Sullivan, who was an artist at TSR and also a game designer that I'd worked with, and my wife, who was a game editor, to write some of the creatures. And I can't remember all of them, but I'll tell you this: that my wife wrote the description for the huts, and she is the reason that they changed sex in the middle of their life cycle.
Uh-huh.
She,
Interesting.
yeah, she wrote that up and said, "All right, this is what the huts are," and because she was very much into biology in
Mhm.
college, and so she understood all of that stuff. And I was like reading that, and I was like, well, "What do you mean they changed sex?" And she's like, "No, no, it's a real thing. Slugs do it all the time."
Right, right. Interesting. That's one detail I did not know, which recently came up in some Star Wars discussions, which fans, they go back and forth. What's really interesting around Star Wars lore is that these always legends. Obviously, a lot of the stuff over the 40 plus years has been very well documented, while
Yeah.
the other information is kind of loose, and there's some sort of urban legends built around them, and the fandom discusses it without end. Which brings me to my next question. uh, Once again, authors discussed different experiences working at Lucas Ranch, working directly or indirectly with George. Did you have any personal feedback or interaction with George Lucas?
Um, no, I didn't have any personal. Um, I never met George, although I did meet a taxi driver who drove him around town once.
Mhm.
Um, and I met, several people obviously who knew him, but I never met George or worked with him directly. I suspect that a few of the comments that I got back on some of my product, some of my outlines and so forth,
Mhm.
had come from George because everything ran through him at that time.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't know what comments were his and what comments were Howard Rothman's or somebody else's.
Mhm. And when you got deep into the new Jedi Order series and Legacy series, which I would say are perhaps most talked about today because they are very grandiose kind of projects. Ron runs 19 books long, which I'm actually having a series of podcasts going one book at a time. And this wonderful reviewer, Megan, her and I, we discussed your books as well, which are such huge fans of, and was just a monumental task to bring all of these characters. And over the years, fans would read about them, and the story would go on and on and on until the very climatic end. But to you personally, when you were working, let's say, for New Jedi Order, was it understood that the expanded universe was this canonical thing which connects to the movies, the cartoons, and the comic books and everything else?
Well, what we were told about the expanded universe was that it was canon until George says it's not. So it was always
Uh-huh.
that George could overrule anything we did, but up to that point, we had to consider it canon, which meant it was more of an obligation than a reward, because it meant that we had to really know the canon that came before us. So by the time I'd written by the time I wrote Star by Star, which is my first Star Wars book
Hmm.
novel, um, I think there had been something like 80 novels already out. So I had to know, I didn't have to know them intimately, but I had to know the story and the background and the general plots of all of those and the character arcs for any of the characters that I was going to use who had appeared in those previous novels.
Hmm.
So the research was immense, even before I started. And
Wow.
I started as a fan and somebody who had read certainly Timothy Zahn's and Kevin J. Anderson's books. And so I had read probably 25 or 30 of the 80 books, but that,
Nice.
that left me like 50 books to read. And
I'm
it,
still
it
not
took,
done with them.
yeah, it took a lot of work, and remembering all of those details was beyond any human.
Hmm.
Um, Fortunately, we had Leland Chi and Pablo Hidalgo, who both were very good at bringing, filling in authors on what we didn't know and what we were missing and getting wrong. So without those guys, it would have been an impossible task to
Hmm.
even include all of the characters that I did in Star by Star. And I knew, a lot of the characters in Star by Star came from Kevin J. Anderson's New Jedi Order series or Young Jedi Knights series, and I had read those and the books that he had written with Rebecca, the Junior Jedi Knights. Am I remembering those titles right? But I'd
Hmm.
read all those and loved them and thought, oh gosh, and I'm going to be writing about Anakin, so I'm going to be able to bring all of these characters. And I brought all of them in, but I wouldn't have been able to keep them nearly as tight to continuity
Yeah.
if it hadn't been for Leland Chi and Pablo.
Yeah, which there is also a kind of another urban legend going around, which actually is substantiated via a couple of screenshots that we have of this thing. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, called Star Wars Holocron, which was supposedly there was this CD that was going around, which almost had like Excel sheets type of database of all the terminology, ships, and so on. But and you're now basically, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're saying there was some kind of concerted effort, a writing group that was watching out New Jedi Order and other expanded universe novels, right?
Yeah, that the holocron is. I can confirm that it was more than just a rumor.
Yes.
Um, it actually existed. They used it. Um, at I can't remember exactly when they gave me a copy of it,
Hmm.
but I had a copy of it. I still have a copy of it. I probably don't have a computer that can read the copy anymore because it was a long time ago. But I definitely have CDs with the Star Wars holocron on it. Um, and it was an immense, valuable resource.
Hmm.
It was organized in much the same way as Wikipedia is.
I would imagine.
And so in Wikipedia, it was actually a little easier to use just because it was easier to access.
Hmm.
So as I was writing, very often I would use Wikipedia to do my initial research on characters
Oh wow.
you know items and just anything, planets, whatever I needed to research.
Hmm.
And then I would go and confirm it with the holocron. And there would be, I would say about 15% of the time, maybe 10% of the time, there'd be a difference between Wikipedia and the holocron. And of
Hmm.
course, the holocron being the official document,
Hmm.
that's what you would go with.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about, there's a vastly like hotly debated topic of what is canonical, what is not, where any interruptions or run-ons in the expanded universe. And I always argue, which I sort of try to keep a level-headed approach to both new and old Star Wars and keep the balance between the two. I like certain things in old things and dislike them in the new, and it's all right. Right, it's okay. Not everything is your cup of tea, but there had to be this sort of consistency, and particularly when Meg and I we talk about your novels, you just feel it when you read those characters and they translate from this, and especially we will touch upon this a little bit more, when you go from the New Jedi Order series back all the way back to the Young Jedi Knights and Junior Jedi Knights, they're very recognizable. Those kids are now adults. They're obviously thrust in this entirely new war, new circumstances. They're much more mature now. They're presented with these adult choices that they have to make. But they're still those same kids that you remember, like, oh my God. And you know, and now you have grown them, and they're mature, they're different, they have evolved. It almost feels like you're standing behind the shoulder of a dear friend and observing their lives. And I want to actually start moving into the new Jedi Order series. Guys, it was understood, or at least my understanding of it was, that after the early Bantam era, which I love and cherish, from Children of the Jedi, The Truce at Bakura, all those novels, yes, Darksaber too, guys, I love all of that stuff. But there was some criticism from the public, and it wasn't just the saying the quality of writing is off or this or that. People are basically saying that the main heroes felt invincible. They don't suffer from anything. There's no sense of, you gotta raise the stakes. And of course, the writing team has indeed reacted to that criticism. And they said, all right, we're going to up the ante. We're going to raise the stakes. And obviously, when we opened up with a Vector Prime, R.A. Salvatore's first novel, the first foray in New Jedi Order, guys, major spoiler alert. Okay, if you don't want to find out this story is going to be full of spoilers now, you have been warned, okay? But we begin with a bang. We witness Chewie's epic death, right? He stands, he shouts at the moon, and is very colorful and tragic scene going on there. Obviously, Han Solo's child, Anakin Solo, is saved. But we get to book number 9 by you, star by star. And it has arguably some of the most significant events in the expanded universe. And once again, spoiler alert, we have the Jedi Strike Team who is assigned to the mission on Merkur to go and destroy this Voxan Queen. And they do succeed, but at a very great cost. We have this tragic loss of the youngest of the Solo children, Anakin Skywalker. How did the decision of killing a major character come about?
Well, it started with, you have to remember that Bantam ceded the license, and Del Rey took the license over. And the editors at Del Rey, Shelley Shapiro and Kuyu Lang and Steve Saffel, had a very strong sense that exactly what you were talking about is that there was no peril left. And the heroes were never in danger. And that was just a function of the licensing world at the time. And so when they took it over, I imagine them having a conversation with Lucasfilm that went something like this: we're not going to do that unless you let us kill some characters. And Lucasfilm went along. And of course, that's how it came up to begin the series. I mean, Vector Prime was their first book in that whole series.
Yeah.
Del Rey's first book after they took over the license. And they began it with killing Chewie. So, and that was to let them know that you were serious. And then 9 books later, this was part of their plan from the beginning, even before I was on board, was to kill Anakin in the 9th book. And so that was always part of the plan. And, I've heard a lot of rumors that I have no way of knowing about whether they were going to kill somebody else or not. And George said, no, you kill Anakin because I don't like having 2 Anakins, I've heard that. I don't know whether it's true or not.
Right.
But I can confirm that it was always part of the plan from the time Del Rey took over the license to kill Chewbacca and then to kill Anakin. And I'll tell you a story about that, because my good friend Bob Salvatore, and of course our friends, we wrote together in the Forgotten Realms. And Bob is the reason that I wrote. I was asked to write in Star Wars because he knew that I was interested in Star Wars. He was writing Vector Prime, and he said, "Hey, call up Troy, see if he wants to participate in this. He'd be a great addition." And so I get a call from Shelley Shapiro at Del Rey before I ever knew her, and she said, "Are you interested in writing some Star Wars?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She said, "Great, send me some samples." And so I sent her a couple of samples. I think I sent her Pages of Pain and a couple of other books to show what I could do. And I called her up like a month later and said, "What do you think?" And she says, "Oh, they were great. We'll get back to you." And this goes on. I call her up once a month for about 8 or 9 months, right?
Oh my God.
And finally, I'm like thinking, it's always the same answer. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, okay, it's not going to happen. So I stopped calling. And then about 6 weeks after my last call, she calls up and says, "Okay, we're ready to make an offer." And I'm like, "Oh, great. I'll get a proposal together." And she says, "No, we know what we want you to write." And I said, "Great. What do you want me to write?" And she says, "Well, can't tell you yet. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement first." And I said, "Okay, well, send me the non-disclosure agreement." She said, "Okay, we'll do that, but we're in a little bit of a hurry, so I want to send you the contract at the same time." And I said, "So you want me to sign a contract for a product that I don't even know what I'm going to be writing?"
Okay.
you know? And she said, "Yeah, that's about the size of it." And I said, "Well, it's Star Wars, okay." you know. So I signed the contract, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and they send me a Bible, which is about that thick. It's a
Okay.
loose leaf Bible. And it has all the character profiles and all of the world profiles. And then it has the plot points for the new Jedi Order. All right. And at this point, Vector Prime hadn't come out yet. Nobody had read it except the proofreaders, right? So I'm reading through the plot points for Vector Prime, and I get to the part where Chewbacca dies. And I call up my friend Bob Salvatore, and I said, "You killed Chewbacca." I didn't even get past that. And he kind of gets quiet for a minute, and then he starts laughing, and he says, "Wait till you see who you kill." And I was
Wow.
like, "What?" And so then I flipped ahead to my book and go down there, and I'm like reading all the stuff that happens in that. Anakin Solo dies. Oh my God.
That
Cursed
is so
unfolds. Oh my
intense.
God. It was like, I was like, oh, now I see why they wanted me to sign the contract before they told me what I was writing.
That's awesome. And it's such a risk. It's like, hey, here's your contract. Here's a non-disclosure. Are you up for it? You know what? Gee, it's Star Wars. Yeah, I think I'm up for it. Let's go.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
it was, and
yeah.
at the time when I saw that what happened in that book, I knew, all right, this is going to be either a book that makes me or breaks me, because
Mhm.
after this, I will never have trouble getting another book to write again, or I will never be able to write another book, and
Mhm.
it'll all depend on how I handle it.
I have my personal opinion again, not just to, you know, it's genuinely, sincerely yours are. I've said it over the years, even before I started my tiny little YouTube channel. Your books always resonated to me. They're so filled with maturity and forethought, and there was such depth to character that is sorely missing from media today. That once again, you felt like you lived, especially Star Wars books. They helped me some really dark times in my lifetime, really dark times. And opening these chapters, the New Jedi Order is probably some of the most memorable stuff I've read. Like, TroyDenning, let's go. I know I'm in for a treat. It's gonna be special. And I'm the sort of fan who does love all the fireworks, lightsabers, ship exploding. But for me, that's always secondary. That's
Yeah,
just the veneer. If I don't care for the characters and their journeys, which will bring me to my next questions, it's all for naught. I forget it very quickly. Very quick questions on this book, and I did want to move on and touch on the other couple of books that you've done. Uh, Star by Star is very dense on action. There's a lot of action sequences. How important was it to balance it out with the story and character development?
well, that one of my pet peeves in watching movies is that you get you get to there's a certain class of movie where you watch at action movies, and it starts off with a big action scene, and then they think that developing the plot and building it to a climax just consists of more action, right? Until you get to the end where you have people outrunning fireballs and just ridiculous stuff.
Mhm.
And that always feels hollow to me. And so knowing that Star by Star was going to be a movie or a book, that was just filled with action. It had to be because of everything that happened in the plot points that I was given. Um, had to really think about what that means. And the way that you build action and give action meaning is that you raise the stakes, right? Is so that in the first third of a book, this is what I generally do. The first third of a book, there's something at stake that is usually personal. You know, the character is going to lose something if he doesn't achieve something. And then in the second third of the book, the stakes become universal, so that it's something, you know, like his whole community is going to lose something if he doesn't succeed and fix this problem. And then where do you go from there? I mean, you know, it's like, right, you know, the country is going to end if, you know, the world's going to end if I don't fix this problem. Well, where do you go from there? That's when you go to the spiritual stakes, when the character has to make a decision that is going to define who he is. And that's how you increase the stakes and increase the depth and make a big action scene, make the climax count. If you don't do that, the climax is just, you know, it's just fireballs. But if you do that, and, you know, it can be just the simplest, smallest piece of action. But if the character's whole spirit is at stake, and who he is, and you know what kind of person he's going to be or is, then you end up making a really, really important action scene. And the action itself can be something, you know, as simple as one swing of a sword, or you know, just the decision to do one violent act, or not to do one violent act.
And I just remember the whole sequence of them when they're a group of these young Jedi. They're communicating with their allies off planet, and I believe the Falcon is at one point hovering over there, but they can't pick up the kids, and they all struggle, and some of them are straggling and being left behind. And Anakin coming forth and reaching that maturity and becoming the beacon of light in that very extreme situation. It just felt so powerful. And one last question I had in regards to this book, you know, there's a very touching and sweet moment, a blossoming first love between Anakin Solo and Tahir Vela. Why was it important to include that, knowing that you would kill off Anakin?
Well, again, it's stakes. You know, it's first of all, you don't ever want to make a death easy. I mean, if you're going to kill a character, you want to do it in a way that's going to be painful.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to make it cheap, you know. And so it was important to show that Anakin was not just this young action hero. It's that he's a kid. You know, there's people who love him and count on him. He's got a future, and really what developing that relationship with Tahiri was all about was, you know, showing that his future is going to be stolen from him.
It's in a way almost like a Romeo and a Juliet story, right?
Yeah.
They're in this, in a Romeo and Juliet, you have two warring families, but here obviously you have two warring nations, right? The extragalactic Yuzong Vong and the, you know, denizens of this galaxy. And in the midst of this terrible nightmarish war, these two innocent young souls. And once again, it brings it all home.
And it's important to remember there that Anakin isn't the only one who suffered. I mean, you know, think about Tahiri and his brother and sister.
And the aftermath with Han, right? Yeah. We see the aftershock of that in the next couple of novels, which gradually, it still shows you that the person is hurting. It's a living, breathing human being. It's not just like, oh, the end of the book, let's move on to the next one. It's like a serialized TV show. It really translates into the future stories.
Yeah.
Troy, I wish we could have talked for 25 hours, but because I'm trying to make it all within 1 hour, I want to move on to probably one of my favorites, Star Wars trilogies, which we have a sequence on. We have the Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy. We have Kevin J. Anderson's Jedi Academy trilogy. We have A.C. Crispin's Young Han Solo trilogy, the original Han Solo trilogy. But the Storm War. First of all, I got to say, the covers to those books are kick-ass. To this day, they're just some most banger awesome, larger than life. You have Leia, you have Han, you have Luke just
Yeah.
projecting so much power and energy. I'm like, I remember seeing them on the bookshelves here in New York City in Barnes and Nobles where I usually went, oh my God, all right, I gotta have this. Swoop, all three of them. So I'm gonna make one comparison here. Obviously, uh, Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers Renaissance we're living in. All because of this one. I don't know if you're aware or not, this Helldivers Through video game, which is basically a translation of the book into the game scene without the title, just spawned so much talk about the Starship Troopers. And obviously, so much media was influenced by that, from the Aliens sequel by James Cameron to the Halo video game. And we have insectoid creatures in your Swarm War, which obviously, story wise, your book is vastly, significantly different. But was there any kind of sort of inspiration between the two?
Well, obviously, I was a big Starship Troopers fan. Um, One of the highlights of my convention career was posing with Dina Meyer at a convention one time, and she was giving me a hug. So that was like, all right, Starship Troopers, you know. But it wasn't a direct inspiration. I'll tell you what, I mean, it was, I would say that it was something that was in the back of my mind, that I wanted to keep in mind, but my direct inspiration was, I'll tell you the story. They called me up, and this is the only time it ever happened. Um, Sue Rostoni called me up and said, "Hey, we want you to write a Star Wars trilogy." And Shelley was on the line too.
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh, great. About what?" And she said, "Well, whatever you want." And I said,
Okay.
"Really? Whatever I want?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I had just moved on to a piece of property that was 4.5 acres in the woods, right? And there was my wife and I who lived there, two dogs, about, I don't know, a dozen deer, probably a couple dozen turkeys, and about 6 million bugs, right? And I thought, who is winning the evolutionary war here? You know, it's the bugs. Those are the guys that are going to be around when we're gone. And so when they asked me, when they said that, I said, "Oh, great. Can it be about bugs?" And they got quiet for a minute and they said, "Would there be any Jedi in it?" And I said, "Sure, I can throw in some Jedi if you want." And that's how the Darkness trilogy began.
Mhm. And Star Wars franchise, obviously over the 40-year span of the expanded universe, even now in modern Star Wars, it is just very much like Star Trek. It's so filled with rich and distinct alien species and their cultures. So you've kind of hinted at how the Killiks that you have in the Darkness trilogy came about, but how did you think of developing their hive mind via Jedi control? How did that idea come about?
Um, well, first I have to note that the Killiks are actually Kevin J. Anderson's invention.
Hmm.
Um, and he had invented them as a race on, oh, I can't remember the name of the planet, but he had just mentioned him in one of his side books that he'd written about this, this lost civilization of hives and
Oh my God, yeah, I keep
yes,
forgetting the name of that book. I have it sitting on
yeah,
the shelf. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so that was the original inspiration of the
Mhm.
Killiks. And the hive mind was just from observing the insects on my property and the way that they behaved and how they seemed to have this intelligence that existed through across half an acre of land.
Mhm.
You'd see insects acting in a coordinated way, and I was just trying to figure out how that worked.
I think it worked out great. I think to me personally, insects are on the side of familiar in sci-fi, and you have to
Yeah,
do it extremely well to capture the audience. And I'll be frank with you. In the beginning, I was like, I don't know. I did love Barabels, the lizards. Some of them become Jedi.
yeah,
I did love the Shiriuk in Truce Bakura. in six, I just don't know. Okay, let's give. I always try to give it benefit of the doubt and go in with a clear mind and have not any biases. Let's see what the book and the author has to offer, and it worked out wonderfully. And once again, this trilogy brings back many established characters which you kind of inherited, right? You have Zek, you have Lobaka, you have Tahiri Vela, and including its main villain, right? Reinhard Thal, written previously by Kevin J. Anderson, Rebecca Mwesta, and other authors. How excited were you to take ownership of these characters and take them into uncharted territory?
Well, I didn't look at it as taking ownership of them. I looked at it as honoring tradition that had already been established, and it was. I was excited, but it was as much when I wrote those characters. I'm always trying to do an homage to the original author, so I would never take ownership of a character and say, "Oh, I didn't like what he did with it. I'm going to do something different." To me, that's not, you just do a different character if you're going to do that. If you're going to use somebody else's character, you want to honor the spirit that they created and try to, show that character moving on and living in a new time.
Yeah.
So,
you know what I do? When I have a book recommendation list on my channel, and every time somebody asks me about the Dark Nest trilogy, I always recommend, I say, guys, if you want to get the most emotional resonance from these books, the biggest reward, go back, read the Young Jedi Knights, familiarize with yourself their characters, and then when you go here, it's gonna be a banger. You guys are gonna really enjoy it. Because another thing that you did that I was absolutely fascinated with is you put its main villain, Reinhard Thal, through a literal meat grinder. Some of the stories, I mean, I've read all of these books years back when they were coming out. Some of the stories and sequences and scenes are vague in my memory. Pardon me, it's been years. But especially that final confrontation with Reinhard, like, oh my God, it is so visceral. It's so brutal. But at the end of it, there's still a hopeful note for him because he is returned. Luke is able to talk him down and he's returned to the Alliance for this psycho treatment. And I wanted to ask, how important was it to have this finalize the trilogy with a happy ending?
Well, I think in that one, it was very important because keep in mind that was following Star by Star. I wrote Tatooine Ghost in between, but then it was this, this was the direct timeline sequel to Star by Star, and Star by Star was so hard. It was, and it had to be, but it was very much ended on down notes because it was like everything just goes to shit, right? So to try and reverse that and lift it up and stay true to Rayner's character, because Rayner was never an evil character.
Mm-hmm.
He was misguided. He became lost because of what he had been through in the war, but he was still very much an honorable character. And so it just would have been kind of wrong and hollow, I think, to end with him dying. You had to redeem him.
Yeah, it makes total sense, especially because chronologically the Swarm War trilogy takes place after the New Jedi Order. Here we've been through this, fire, and now we're back into it with a Dark Nest trilogy. And of course, at the end of it, there's this happy, uplifting moment. It's like, oh, okay, we got through this, guys. We're going to be there. Right. Even Reinhard, maybe there's still a chance for him, which I understand where you were coming from.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Anakin wasn't the only guy who suffered in Star by Star. There were a lot of those young Jedi Knights who didn't make it or were severely damaged.
Jacen, Jaina, I mean, they came out different people at the other end of it.
Yeah, and Reinhard was one of them.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm telling you, it stayed with me over the years. It was just so memorable, so powerful that I don't have to reference back to Wikipedia. I'm like, oh my God, that scene was just so powerful. Legacy of the Force, Tempest, Inferno, Invincible. This new series, once again, badass covers, really beautiful design. As a graphic designer, I have to say these guys went to work with it. But this new series, was much darker in tone. Some of the fans even criticized it, saying it's too dark, with heavy political implication and philosophical undertones. What did you personally enjoy the most and found the most intriguing about that era of Star Wars?
Oh boy. Well, I loved carrying the romance between Tenel Ka and Jacen on forward, and and giving the Solos a grandkid. That was one of the things I enjoyed most about that series. And I'll tell you the hardest thing. One of the hardest books I ever wrote was Invincible.
Do I know it?
Yeah,
Do I know it?
yeah, and that one was really hard because the way Karen had set it up,
Mm-hmm.
so that um, Jaina was you know this student, and she was being trained to do this, and she had to shut off all of her emotions. And how do you write about a sister killing a brother without any emotions? I mean, how do you do that? But at the same time, Karen had set it up, I think, appropriately, that she's just shutting down. She's got to shut it off because she couldn't do it if she was allowing those emotions to flow freely. So that's why I went back. This is where, being a Kevin J. Anderson fan paid off, and I went back and lifted all of those jokes that Jacen used to tell and started the paragraphs with them, because I knew that they would carry the emotional weight in that story.
Yeah.
And I
And you
think,
would make connection. Once again, it makes it so much more powerful when you know the prior material,
yeah,
because you make the connection between the two. They're not just names, Jaina Solo, Jacen Solo. It's
yeah,
very easy to extract a book and say, well, I don't think it was this or that, and this author wasn't doing it right here or there. You have to understand where it came before. I think
yeah.
you benefit reading the expanded universe altogether, as each book being a chapter of a larger story.
Oh
There's one
yeah,
huge
yeah, for
canvas,
sure.
and when you plug everything, you put it into place, suddenly you're like, oh my God, this is the grand story.
That's the thing I love about the expanded universe, is that it's all part of the same story, and the more of it the richer it is. And
Absolutely.
and I've never ever read or been involved with another. Well, Halo is somewhat that way, but I've never been involved with another franchise where it just builds on itself
Mm-hmm.
that way and enriches itself. I mean, the more you know about Zek's history, the more you know about what's Jaina's other love uh, guy from the MCU.
Jagged
Oh,
Fell.
I'm
Jagged
pardon?
Fell.
Yeah, Jagged Fell. The more you know
Yeah.
about his history, I
Yeah.
blanked on him. I'm sorry. I was always a Zek shipper, and so it's always hard for me to remember that she actually ended up with Jagged.
We always, I mean, there's so much material that you constantly
Yeah,
have to remind yourself.
yeah. The more you know about that, the
Yeah.
richer that whole story becomes.
So there's one scene that I wanted to touch on, that in the New Jedi Order, there's this one mysterious creature called Vergiri, which, spoiler alert, turns out to be the Sith who really tampers with Jacen Solo's psyche. And you
Yeah,
picked up from that thread and brought Lumia, the Dark Lady of the Sith from the early days Marvel Comics, and Marar, Luke's former pupil who also turned to the dark side, to further elaborate Jacen's fall to the dark side. What was imperative for you to develop to ensure that the audience believes in his transformation?
well, to me, Jacen's fall to the dark side was a natural progression, because Anakin's death just tore him apart,
Mm-hmm.
and he was trying to do the right thing. I mean, the thing to remember about Jacen and his fall is that he was always, even right up until the end, trying to do the right thing. His mistake wasn't in his goals. His mistake was in the means he was willing to employ to use them. And
Like his
and
grandfather.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that's, to me, that's the very definition I mean, there are two kinds of evil. There's the kind of evil that knows it's evil and is happy to be that way and revels in it.
Hmm.
Then there's the kind of evil that doesn't know it's evil. And that's the more dangerous one because that's the more ruthless one, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah. And that's what Jacen was.
Hmm.
And you had to show him falling and why he fell and
And
how he fell.
constantly justifying it to himself along the way. Now, I'm doing it for
Yeah.
my child. I'm doing it for my wife. Luke doesn't
Right.
understand. I'm going to save him. I'm going to help them all. There's so much
Yeah.
passion and overflowing feelings in him, and he
Yeah.
comes from a good place. But we see that happening with Anakin in Attack of the Clones. He's
Yep.
falling, and Anakin is not entirely oblivious to it. He knows that he's angry.
Yeah.
He knows that there's something broken inside of him.
Yeah. And I think the difference between Anakin and Jacen is I don't think Jacen recognized it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, he never saw that he was in the wrong. He
Yeah.
never saw that he was broken. He just thought that he was doing what had to be done
Yeah.
and never recognized that by by being willing to do literally anything,
Mm-hmm.
he had crossed the line into the darkness.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the Inferno book, we continue with extremely dark themes. We see Jacen now turned Darth Caedus
Yeah.
and Mara Jade's murderer, right? He
Yeah.
kills a family member, his aunt.
Yeah.
And he subverts Tahir Vela. He forces her to join his side. He
Yeah.
sends the gag troopers, the space police, to arrest his parents for their political beliefs. He bombards Kashyyyk Fortress with Luke on the planet side. He even his lover, Tenel Kajo, this Dathomiri girl, she turns away from him with his daughter. And by this time, he's completely broken. When writing a major villain like that, what reaction do you hope to evoke from the audience?
Sympathy. You know, when I when I try to write a villain,
Mhm.
I try to never think of them as a villain. And when I'm writing from their point of view, I'm trying to write them as a hero. So I'm trying to, stay true to who they are, but who they are is a villain. But they're a hero in their own mind. You know, I have a hard time thinking of any villain that I've ever written in any book
Mhm.
who thinks of himself as a villain. It just doesn't happen. If somebody is evil in my books, they're evil because they're willing to do anything and cross any line. It's not that they're evil because they're just that utterly selfish.
Hmm. Which adds an extra dimension to the character, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hmm.
It's I would say that the advice I would give to any would be, up and coming writer is, think of your villains as heroes.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, I want to wrap things up very quickly. We do have, if you don't
Sure.
mind, a couple of more questions on the
Yeah.
Invincible.
Yeah. You
The
can take as
last
long
book.
as you want. I'm free.
Thank you so much. So, Invincible. And I'm going to transmit basically the words of many expanded universe fans, not just my personal opinion. It has arguably the greatest lightsaber duel in Star Wars. I don't care if it's books, if it's the movies, because when fans were reading it, I used to work and manage a comic book / video game store here in New York City in the Bronx
Yep.
area called Games and Comics. Obviously, I was very in the nerddom, kind of like in the books and comics and Star Wars fans. And people were like, did you read this book? Oh my God. And like without and people would stand there for hours discussing that particular scene. How proud were you to have worked on such a key story in the Star Wars lore?
Well, I never really thought about, it's a thing when you're doing a thing,
Mhm.
you're just doing the thing. You're not thinking about your legacy or anything else. Um, so I was just happy to do it and to do it what I thought was a fairly strong way. Um, the battle between I think you're talking about the battle between Jacen and Jaina, right? I mean, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, and that was built, that was being built up, for a long, long time. I mean, that was the roots of that are in Star by Star,
Yeah.
you know, and then you can see it coming if you go back and you look through Darkness. You can just see it building and coming. Um, so that battle was, remember when I'm talking about the spirit, you know, what you're willing to do with your spirit and the spiritual sacrifice that you're going to make in a battle.
Hmm.
And that's in the climax. That's a prime example of it. I mean, you don't get much more. You don't get much of more of a spiritual sacrifice than a sister killing a brother.
And I felt that in that moment, Jaina, there's still love, there's still compassion, there's still very Jedi thing. But I don't know if you've ever seen this very popular Japanese samurai film, which was imported here to the United States, called The Shogun Assassin. And it's a popular Japanese film. And in this film, basically, this Ronin, this rogue samurai, becomes a force of power. He becomes an agent of vengeance who is not angry. He's not mad at his former ruler, but he's there to dispense justice. And if you mess with this guy, you're going to find out. And in that particular scene, which I felt was absolutely beautifully done, and I also mentioned to you as well that, you know, these Star Wars books got me through some of the darkest moments in my life, because I just lost my older brother, and here I'm still doing college. I'm trying to console my parents, and I'm trying to take my head off this reality for a moment and suspend the disbelief and go into this magical, fantastical world and imagine I'm somewhere else. And when Jaina gets, you know, and when Jaina gets to him, I think she was preparing herself all this time through all of these books. She's training with Boba Fett, while Jacen is basically trying to have this pet project of Ben Skywalker, trying to see if he's going to have this little prodigy there. And Ben is distanced from him. He has nobody else to rely on. And you said all of these elements are very slowly cooking and are, you know, we're culminating into that scene. But when Jaina confronts him, there is no longer fear. There is no longer confusion about what needs to be done. There's no action in it out of hatred, out of malice. She's like, she is that samurai from Shogun Assassin.
Yeah.
She says, I know what needs to be done. I think there was almost a trilogy of books planned, which never came to fruition, called The Sword of the Jedi, right? Where Jaina becomes something greater and the entire order is looking up to her. So I think we see a culmination of that in that fight scene. She becomes the Sword of the Jedi right there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very much very accurate, and it's very true. The Sword of the Jedi trilogy was going to follow Crucible, and Christie Golden was going to write
Christie
it.
Golden, exactly. I even wrote a small petition. I don't know if people paid attention. Like, please make it happen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was wonderful, and it was going to be Jaina taking the leadership of the Jedi Order.
Yeah.
Which it was the perfect book. It was the Crucible. The original purpose of Crucible was to set in motion the transition from the old generation, because Han was 70, and Luke is in his 60s, to the younger generation taking over the action leads, and it was going to be Jaina kind of stepping up.
Yeah. Talking about powerful women in Star Wars before 2012. We had them, guys. Check it out. We absolutely had them.
Yeah, there has never been a shortage of powerful women in Star Wars.
Absolutely.
Anybody who says there has been, not paying attention.
Absolutely. And I wanted to home in a little bit just on that very specific segment, the final sequence of that battle at the immolation pit, where Jaina finally, she kills off her brother. How do you manage the balance of a very kinetic and fast-paced duel versus the emotional tension adding on to it? Just in terms of prose, how do you work it out?
Well, I think that first of all, it all goes back to the basics of setting the stakes. You have to set the stakes to begin with, and the reader knows what's at risk. And the reader knew at that point, it's not only the Jacen's life and Jaina's life that's at risk. it's their spirit, their spirits. It's
Right,
who
right.
they are.
Hmm.
Is she going to be able to actually kill her brother? And because if she can't do it, she's not going to be the Jedi that she needs to be. The master that she becomes later.
Right.
But the cost of doing it, that's been part. That was being built up for, I don't know, 9 books. It's just she's you've seen it coming for 9 books. At least I hope you read
Hmm.
it. Uh,
And Troy, I'm like, go ahead.
so all of that momentum and that baggage is the reader is carrying that going into that final scene. So the actual mechanics of writing that scene, it's all been done in advance. All you have to do is bring out a few phrases that remind the reader of those stakes,
Hmm.
of what's going on. You just have to let the reader know that the character is aware of what they're doing and understands it, and they're still doing it.
Yeah. But even without going to the past, to the prior books, if we were just to judge the book on its own merit, if you may permit me, to compare your writing style, not that it's similar, but a certain quality that you and Kevin J. Anderson and Michael Stackpole have is that when you're reading, I'm very detail oriented. Like I home in on a scene and I try to be in it one sentence at a time. My mind doesn't jump around. I follow it in real time. And when you wrote that scene, in your writing in general, what I was able to enjoy is the way that you're a wordsmith, the way that you put words together. There's so much subtext between what the character is doing, saying, and what they're not saying, but you still manage to convey. Once again, I want to repeat, it is so sorely missing in modern content, where whether it's a new Star Wars show or not, you have a character strike a powerful pose in beautiful concept, and there's $200 million backdrop behind him, and that's all you get. What you see
Yeah.
is what you get. And when you read books like yours, there's something going on. It activates something in your mind. For example, I'm bilingual, first language Russian speaker, and I had to learn English when I came here at 14 years of age. And my favorite English author became, obviously I knew of all the great literature from Russia. We used to
Right.
read Edgar Allan Poe. But when I came here and started reading English, I became fascinated with Edgar Rice Burroughs and, oh my God, why am I blanking? The Conan author.
Conan Doyle. Yeah.
Hmm?
Arthur Conan Doyle.
No,
Right?
no, no. The Conan
No,
the
no.
Barbarian. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, now we're both blanking on it.
Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard.
Yeah,
Sorry, guys.
Robert E. Howard. Yeah.
When you read Robert E. Howard's short stories, he manages to do in a single paragraph what other authors do in a chapter. He transplants your mind inside of his story with economy of words. And once again, when I talk about that being focused on a scene, like when I read the Swarm War trilogy, when I read The Invincible, what you manage to do is you read the scene. Not only is very cinematic, but just how do you pull it off? I'm like, oh my God, I'm living it with Jaina. I know what she's feeling. I know what Jacen is feeling. I know how mad he is. He can't overcome it. Oh my God, what's going to happen next? And you're caught in it.
Yeah. Well, two things. It's one, paying attention to the context and
Mm,
emotional context for, I mean, that's that whole thing, the thing where I talk about building up to the spiritual conflict. It's if if you don't do that, no matter how beautifully you write action, it won't have the resonance.
mhm,
You have to have the stakes to make it resonate. The other thing that I have done is, one of my favorite authors is William Goldman, the author of The Princess Bride,
mhm,
Marathon Man. If you read his action scenes, he is the absolute master of making the rhetoric match the meaning. You know, you go on, you'll have a big whirling sword fight, and if you read some of his paragraphs, there'll be like a paragraph that's a page long, and it's one sentence, and it's one battle, and it's just like, woo, there, it's just like this swirling guy going along, and you feel you have this that just imparts to the reader the sense of that flowing battle and stuff, and then he'll break it up with 2 words or 3 words paragraph, just like boom, 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 and that just has just reading that along. You're reading all this fast moving, flowing language, and then all of a sudden it stops, and you've got that impact in the reading itself, you know. And so I very consciously try to employ those techniques, and I don't know how well I do it, but
Well, you do have a fan in here, obviously. If it's not, if you guys have not figured it out by now, I love it. And James Luceno, also another one I forgot to mention.
yeah,
I just
yeah,
absolutely adore his
James is a
writing
very
style.
great
It is
author.
just, it's a certain quality about it, which again will bring me to the last final 2 questions. Before I ask them, Troy, and absolutely, I'm so grateful that you were able to do it. I wanted to do it for the longest. I was so afraid to even approach and ask, like, I don't know, he may be busy. Let me try. I'm so delighted to have spoken to you. Thank you for your time.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Yeah, I hope, guys, all of you will go down and check out all the relevant links. I'll put it in the video. But Troy, the last questions I have for you, number one is in relationship to modern age and what's happening in the scape of literature and films and cinema, what would you say makes a story and its characters timeless and relevant to the time it's written in, but also across generations?
Boy, you don't
Loaded.
ask easy questions. um, I think first, the author just has to write for himself and his audience. If I set out to write a timeless classic, it's not going to be a timeless classic. It's going to be a pretentious piece of crap, right? So you have to concentrate on what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, on the story you're trying to tell. And if the story that you're trying to tell is timeless, then you'll have a timeless piece of work. But if it's not timeless, then you'll have a piece of work that only serves a short period of time, 30 years, 50 years. But what's wrong with that? You know?
So, in other words, don't concern yourself with catering to demographic or modern trends, but be just genuine to your fandom.
Yeah, just tell your story. I see a lot of young authors who make 2 mistakes. One, they spend more time marketing than they do writing. Right? And that's the fault of the publishing industry at whole, is that they don't leave an author the freedom just to be an author. When I was learning to write way back, in the 60s and 70s, it was right at the tail end of the era when the publishers would go out and search for talent, and then they would develop talent, and they would market the talent, and they would do, take care of the marketing and all of that other stuff. Well, sometime after I published my first book, it became the author's job to market himself, right? Or herself.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I'll tell you a story. It's a lot easier to waste time marketing yourself than it is to do the hard work of writing. So a lot of people will end up spending all of their time marketing themselves because that's what the publishers are telling them they have to do, right? But they're not developing their talent as a story writer.
Yeah.
Right? I think about one thing when I'm writing a story. I think about whether that story is going to work and how I can make it work and how I can raise the stakes. I'm just thinking about my story and the story I want to tell. And it doesn't matter what kind of story I'm writing. All the stories I write are tie-in stories. And so I'm trying to serve a lot of masters with them. But the master I'm trying to serve the most is myself. And that's making myself happy in that I'm writing the story that I believe is good, right?
Yeah.
And then the second master I'm serving is the reader, because I want that reader to enjoy the story that I'm writing. And those are the only two goals I have. When I'm writing the story, I'm not thinking about the editor. I'm not thinking about the publisher. I'm not thinking about the marketing. None of that matters. You know, if if the story is good, you can do all that stuff, or you can find somebody to do it for you,
Hmm.
right? If the story's no good, all the marketing in the world is not going to make it worth reading.
Yeah. You know, it's when I graduated from School of Visual Arts here in New York with a degree in a traditional hand-drawn animation, dreaming
Yeah,
to be a Disney animator. In 2007, Disney shut down their 2D studios and it's only Pixar. I'm like, oh boy, what's going on here? And that's why I believe to this day, AI will never replace the spirit and endeavor of human ingenuity. What an author, it's almost like when you draw, which I used to do for hours, whether it's figure drawing, you're drawing animation, your hand and your pencil and yourself become a vessel that just translates this powerful message that takes, as you've mentioned, years to cultivate. And you
yeah,
can't fake it. You can't put a beautiful cover on top of it, which is a plenty of. You go to Barnes and Nobles, which I like to spend hours in there. And I
yeah,
am an impulse shopper, and I'll see books that look absolutely brilliant. But you know what? I read that first page, and it's got to be a seller. If you're not selling me on that first page, I'm not reading your novel. And again, we all
yep,
have different tastes and likes and dislikes. And I don't want to disparage Star Wars modern fans, because I personally partake and enjoy a lot of new things. And I also find a lot of things I could criticize in the old Star Wars. Again, I try to keep an even head, but I do criticize and point out things that I feel problematic. In the modern Star Wars, it particularly is frustrating because you have absolutely brilliant stuff, and next to it, something like you could enjoy and love Acolyte all day, guys. I'm not gonna disparage anyone for loving something that I personally don't enjoy. But you're supposed to sell me on the first episode. That's the first chapter of your book. And when all I see is eye candy, when all I see is grandiose language that is not substantiated by something beneath it, a pillar, something that any viewer, any audience can identify and say, I relate to this. And
right.
again, I'm just speaking my mind, my opinion. Somebody could have polar opposite view of mine and see some value in it that I don't. It's perfectly fine. All that means is that we have different opinions. That's all it is. But my last question is, Troy, in modern media, is there anything that excites you? Is there anything that raises your eyebrows in terms of recent movie or TV show that you have seen that you would say, this is the staple? This is what I would like future modern content to be like?
Yeah, I think so. Yellowstone, those movies,
Mhm.
anything. Oh, what's the author's name or the producer's name? It's slipping my mind now. How
I'm
can
not
it?
sure.
Yeah, Taylor. Um, anyway,
Mhm.
Taylor Sheridan, right?
Mhm.
Anything he does, I have found myself just drawn into, and and I think that that's because he is just a master storyteller.
Mhm.
Um, and so Yellowstone, 1883, 19, what was it, 23, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, all of those stories are just superb. The one he did in Oklahoma with Sylvester Stallone, I
Oh,
can't
you're
remember.
right. I
Yeah, I
keep
can't
forgetting.
remember the
I don't
title of
keep
that.
tabs. There's so many shows out there.
He has so many shows,
Yeah.
but all of those, I think he is our era's Shakespeare. I think he is the guy who is bringing story into homes and and capturing people's attentions and
Mhm.
heart and engaging them in a way that a lot of Hollywood is just missing. And there are other great directors and writers in Hollywood. So I don't want to say that he's the only one, but he
Yeah.
is the most obvious one.
Mhm. You know, for me personally, um, again, growing up in Russia, whether like in Soviet Union in late 80s, early 90s, we all grew up with Western cinema. We all knew Hollywood. We all knew Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Star Wars, all that jazz. But when the Stranger Things launched, I felt like a Russian kid in the 80s again. Just brilliant, mind-blowing, genuine. Like, when was this recorded? Is this from the 80s, the lost tapes? Are they just like publishing this show now? Today? I couldn't believe every season, every character. The concept is just so silly and ridiculous. A bunch of kids, but you can't help it. You
No,
could flip
that's another.
right in the middle of an episode. You could flip the channel and start watching, and there's that certain vintage quality of the '80s cinema that you can't help yourself. You're drawn to it.
Yeah,
And
that's another example of great storytelling.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it is really good storytelling. It has engaging characters that viewers care about because those characters care about each other. That's the key to making readers care about a character, is that the character cares about other characters.
And then the veneer, and then the upside down, and the evil Ruskies over here, and all that funny, goofy, silly, exciting stuff. That's all secondary, but you gotta care about the characters first.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's great characters, and they're doing something. They're trying to solve a problem. You can have a great character that you paint in great detail, but if they're not trying to solve a problem, nobody's going to be interested.
Yeah. And just one character that I really absolutely appreciated, as a straight dude, I'm reading into this couple this girl works at the summer job or whatever, and her male friend who is trying to hit on her, he slowly discovers that she is gay. It's just so eloquently done. It's so eloquent, without screaming, without a gazillion different colors. You empathize with a human being who's going through a human experience. She's not like you, dude. She doesn't like you. Has this journey of a self-discovery, and you're in for the ride. And it's just so exemplary. It's so beautifully done that I wish all of the modern stuff was done like it. And one last thing,
they don't beat you over the head with it.
Exactly.
They just show a character doing what a character does, which is trying to achieve a goal.
And you see humanity.
Yeah, and you see their humanity in it.
And the last one I'll mention is, which just blew my mind. I was waiting on this over a month and calling my brother to watch it. He's like, go watch it yourself, man. And I went and I saw The Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It just blew my mind.
I haven't seen that yet.
In its simplicity, in its naive, direct, straightforward story with no simple answers. There's nothing extravagant about it. It doesn't reinvent the wheels. But you sit down, you escape the world for 3 hours, and you just enjoy it. You have fun.
Yeah. I've heard great things about it, and I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to do that very soon.
Hopefully. If you don't mind, just text me over X and tell me if you enjoyed it. I'll be delighted to hear it.
Okay, we'll do it. Yeah.
Troy, what are your final thoughts to your audience, to Star Wars fans, to those who haven't read your books? And we'll wrap it up here.
I think my final thoughts are that I was incredibly privileged to be a part of a publishing experiment that included a 19-book series and then followed on with 2 9-book series. That, by 3 different authors, the 9-book series and the 19-book series. I don't even know how many different authors we have. But that was an incredibly bold and risky thing to do for Del Rey. I think it paid off in great, great stories that carried the Star Wars universe in a wonderful direction, and in an engaging direction, and one that kept viewers engaged, or readers engaged. So I don't know. I was just in the right time, in the right place at the right time, and I'm really, really lucky to be there.
And even though we can't step in the same river twice, if we have our beloved Timothy Zahn writing modern books, if we have John Jackson Miller and another couple of authors, the names are escaping me, do forgive me now, if they're writing for modern Star Wars, I keep the light going. I keep hoping that I will see TroyDenning writing new Star Wars book again, I will be the first in line to go grab them.
Yeah.
Once again, Troy, it's
I
been a delight.
I don't want to pop your balloon, but I'm going to pop your balloon. I'm not writing Star Wars again.
Yeah, I have ideas why. I can
loved
imagine.
writing it the first time, and I just don't see myself loving it that much writing it again.
Yeah, yeah. I understand, but I think on my end it's always a pleasure, and it's always new and fresh to talk about the books that you did work, and I will always use them honestly as a prime example of this is how you do Star Wars. This is how you enjoy
Thank
it.
you.
And once again, it's you can enjoy. I'm a huge fan of new. Behind me, you could see there's a bunch of new books. I love High Republic. I love a bunch. If it's good, if it's well written, I don't care what logo is on it. I don't care if it's Disney, if it's this, or that. If it's well done, it has merit.
If it's a good story,
If it's good story,
Star Wars story, it stays true to the Star Wars mythos,
Yeah,
and has good characters.
yeah.
I'm all for it.
Same
I'd
here.
love to see those.
Well, guys, this has been a wonderful talk with TroyDenning. I hope you all enjoyed. Once again, please use all the relevant link if you want to be up to date. Check out what Troy's cooking up with the project that he has mentioned early in the podcast are unannounced yet. If you're curious about that, go check it out. We'll see you guys later. Thanks for checking us out. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having me.